link. I'll post a few more. And Beverly, I'll do a quick intro. She's also with the Explorers Club. She's a fellow, and I'll try to make it super short. She's like Indiana Jones, but underwater. And she'll tell a bit more about that. And she managed to change the law in Israel with science. And that's also super interesting. If you could mention how you managed to get street signs saying Tsunami route, which I saw the last time I was in Tel Aviv. Fascinating story. So thanks again, Mark, for joining us, and welcome to Beverly.
Hi. Can everyone hear me okay? You're just gonna give me a nod if I'm coming through.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excellent. Okay, so of course I'm really excited to be here. It was wonderful to get this invitation. I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a bit of a conversation. Of course, I have a presentation to sort of grease the wheels and I hope get some ideas so we can have a little bit of a conversation about the things I'll be sharing with you. So it's kind of interesting. We're sitting here in this moment of somewhat, crisis and disaster in the form of COVID-19, in the form of a plague. And I myself am sort of called myself a bit of a disaster scientist for many years. And I'm very interested in how these things affect societies, how societies respond when we have a disaster situation. And most of what I'm dealing with is disasters in the past, and the idea that by recognizing them, by learning about them, by being aware of them, we can hopefully take some of this information and apply it into the now. Okay, so this is sort of my ultimate goal. And I'm excited to share with you, just like Marcelo explains, a specific example from my work that I'll be able to show you what I'm talking about. Could you make me a co-host so I can share my screen?
You can try and share a screen now.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. No, I still can't. How about now? Oh, there we go. Okay, just a moment. Okay, so today I'm going to focus a bit on what ancient tsunamis, but first let me just tell you about my job. What my job title is what we call a marine geoarchaeologist, and of course, if you take that apart, I'm basically I'm a merge between an underwater archaeologist and a geologist. So I did my first studies, my bachelor's and my master's in archaeology and anthropology with a geology sort of direction, with a emphasis, and then my PhD in geology. And what I do with that is I look at rapid events, what we might call disasters. This is a photograph of one of our divers actually in the middle of a flash flood arriving into the sea. I'm focusing on what's happening on the coastline, happening underwater, and also things that affect the world, which are directly related to the previous presentation. Things like sea level and coastal change. How these things impact us today, but also what we can see from the past that might give us some ideas or some expectations for how to predict things for the future. And also looking at human impacts, things like, how do we interact with our environment and how are we influencing it both for today, like this terrible photograph I've put up here, which is plastic construction garbage that came down a river during a big storm. This is a site that unfortunately we see all over the world, big and small, where so many of the plastic waste is coming through our rivers and beaches and polluting our marine system. But I'm also curious about how long have we been doing this? How much have we been influencing our landscape through our impact on the chemistry, on just manipulating and changing our environment. So I'm going to tell the story that I'll tell today to give us a little food for thought, give us something to think about as far as how how we can learn about our planet through the past. This is an image from NOAA of an earthquake that happened in 2004. So many of you that are in our group today would have been small children, if that. But this was a really, really, really big deal, because when this earthquake happened, it created a tsunami which impacted 22 countries around it. There were deaths in 13 of those countries, and nearly 250,000 people died, in just those few weeks, either in the event or immediately following the event, because of this event. And it was a horrifying experience for the entire region. It shocked the entire world, and it definitely had a major impact on how we look at tsunamis and our concern over this kind of disaster. Well, just a quick little background, a little review for those of you who, today when I talk about this, I can usually say tsunami and everyone has some kind of image in their head, but you have to understand that before 2004, with the exception of places like Japan and places where they might occur or are more in the memory of people, most people in the world didn't really know what a tsunami was. Okay, this is something that today is part of so much of our regular language. I hear kids talking like, oh, it was like a tsunami of homework. It's something that is part of our expressions today. But before 2004, in many parts of the world, people were not aware of what a tsunami was. And so, today I don't really have to explain it, but just a little refresher. Tsunamis are waves, or a series of waves, that are created through the pushing of water, okay? And what will push the water? You can have earthquakes, which is one of the most common things I'm sure one you've all heard. It can be volcanic eruptions. You can have glaciers which are falling apart, landslides, either from land or underwater, meteorites, anything that pushes the water. And this is different than storm waves that are caused by the wind and caused by weather patterns and pressure systems. But what happens is that, like you can see in this diagram, when the wave is produced offshore, it can be quite small. Okay, it's not such a big deal. But as it moves towards the land, you have to think about the entire area of that water has to go somewhere. So as it becomes shallower, that water goes up. Okay, that volume of water has to go somewhere. It will go up, and so the waves will increase in height. And then the big difference from a normal large storm wave is that when it hits the beach, it keeps going, okay? And it can inundate, it can go on land for a very far distance, which is why it can be so destructive. Okay, so let's go back to 2004. This photograph from Reuters, which was, people saw this photograph all over the world, is probably one of the most frightening photographs in this history of tsunamis. And the reason is, we're looking at this photograph and we know what's going to happen. Okay, we can see off in the distance that white foam coming in from the first of a series of waves that came because of that earthquake. But as you can see, we have people on the beach and they're standing there and they're looking and they're curious, and it's unusual, and isn't that interesting? And what a gorgeous day to be out walking on the beach, correct? Why not? It's sunny, it's beautiful. They don't know what's about to happen. And this is what is such a tragedy from 2004, is that the truth is so many people did not have to lose their lives, because the knowledge should have been there, and there were ways that they could have prevented and informed and educated people and had plans in place to make sure that this wouldn't happen. So after the event happened, of course, scientists jumped on planes, made their plans. Researchers came over because they wanted to see, what does a tsunami deposit look like? Here we have this mega tsunami, and it's an opportunity to see what it does on the landscape, how much damage does it cause, and what does that look like? So many of them we geologists like to dig holes, okay, and archaeologists. This is where the two meet very nicely. And so when we dug these holes, and these are some photographs from some published research, not my own, but some of the research from that region. And you can see over on the left here, this upper surface, that sand is tsunami deposit that came in 2004. But it's very easy to see that, oh my goodness, below that you have soils. Okay, that's the non-tsunami, that's normal land. But what's going on below that? Lo and behold, we have another event horizon and even another one before that. So this is telling us that this is not something that is a one-time event. This is something that occurs more than once. And so this is why I'm saying that we could have known that such a large event could happen. And on the right, there's another example from research inside a cave where the dark band on the bottom, this is really a very, very cool study, is actually bat guana. And what happens is when the tsunamis happen, they actually leave, the sand covers the bat guana and preserves it. And you can use that bat guana to date and to figure out the timing of these different events. Okay, so the scientists are saying there were events, but a lot of the people that lived on those coastlines did not have the folklore, the history to know about these earlier events. And the reason is a lot of those populations have developed over the past 50 years, 60 years with air conditioning and transportation of materials. People are able to live in a lot of places around the world where they couldn't live 100 years ago, just because populations, it couldn't hold as many people. And today there are a lot of coastlines where population is growing even faster than off the coastline. And so, but what also came out was that there were some populations, here's a photograph from the Solomon Islands, for example, from another tsunami event, and there were native populations, for example, in the Ottoman Islands, where it seemed that the population was not as impacted by the tsunami, that people went inland, that they went to safer areas. And when they followed up and said, how come? They said, well, we noticed this happening and we noticed the water going out, and we spoke to each other and we checked with the elders, and they said, oh, right. And they had oftentimes an oral history that they knew what was coming. And so they were able to protect themselves. Well, the good news is after 2004, of course, throughout the region, throughout the Indian Ocean coastlines, plans were made, drills were put together, training, just like, when I was growing up, I lived in the United States, and we would have tsunami drills. And so, we wouldn't have tsunami drills, excuse me, we'd have tornado drills. So the same idea where you teach the children and teach people how to respond and create signage programs so that if there's another event, that people's lives will be saved. So I'm going to now show you, this is the sad story. This is the unfortunate story from 2004. But I'm going to give you the alternate history, an alternate story of what we can do, something I hope we'll be able to do in more places in the world. This is a illustration of an ancient Roman harbor that today happens to be underwater. Okay, and for many years, the archaeologists and historians and geologists wanted to understand why the harbor was underwater. And I was part of the team as a student, and then as part of the staff, trying to answer these questions on when, where, how, and why this ancient harbor was destroyed. And we discovered in the early 2000s, so almost 20 years ago, we found this unusual deposit that had pottery and shells that were from the deep and things coming in from land. And the date on it was about the same time as the destruction, and we suggested that maybe it was a tsunami. So we continued to do more research, and we took samples using cores, okay, which is essentially just like a biopsy, where we put a pipe into the seafloor, and then we can read it like tree rings and see past events in the layers of the seabed. And when we looked at these cores, sure enough, we were able to see the event that we'd seen in the archaeological excavations, and we even saw a few more. I'm going to show a short little video just to give you a feeling for what this place looked like, what this excavation looks like. Here we go. Okay. I hope oops, okay. So this is how this is a little animation of how the harbor was made. And so imagine 2,000 years ago, they're building this harbor that has, is a concrete harbor, an artificial harbor, and they made the structure and then built all these different buildings on top of it. And this is the harbor that for some reason was destroyed. And today, if you go there, it looks like a natural reef, but everything that you see around this diver is actually brought there by people. Okay, this is man-made. That does happen to be me, but it's all man-made structures and materials that are this rubble field all over that area. So, and then over time, the biology has taken over it so that you have this nice sort of natural reef. Now I'm going to show you in a moment how we were able to collect these samples and what these layers look like. This big block that you see there, for example, it's not a rock. It's made out of cement, and it was the base of a tower from 2,000 years ago that ended up on its side because of this large tsunami event. So here we have what it looks like today. You can see all these columns that are in the water because of later constructions where they reuse things. And we went out, and here's how we set up our little construction zone to take the samples. Even figuring out how to take the samples was a bit of a challenge. We had a little bit of engineering, though a lot of the materials you see there were things that we picked up around the ground and bought off of the shelf. That's an air hammer on top that's connected to an air compressor on the surface. We nail it in, and then we bring it up by attaching it to an airbag and steel cables, and we're able to bring it to the surface that way. And here we have the moment of truth when you open up a core, and you never really know for sure what's going to be inside it. But in this core, for example, you can very, very clearly see that there are layers that are just sandy, and then there are layers that are very chaotic. Okay, so you see those layers that have rubble and shell. It's very easy to tell the difference. And by the way, this is footage from National Geographic for a special they did about King Herod that they include the tsunami story within it. So these layers, by taking cores all over the area and looking at these layers and getting the ages of the layers, we're able to reconstruct a whole series of tsunami events. So not only did we find that one original event that damaged the harbor, which is this light gray horizon, but we also discovered that there were more tsunamis, that in fact there were a whole bunch. Okay, so after this, I went onto the archaeological site on land to look for more examples, and we found this layer in just a few parts of the archaeological site because so much had been excavated, but we were able to find places where they hadn't fully excavated it. And sure enough, every time we looked for it, we could find the continuation of these deposits. Here's another example. This sandy layer on the base of this wall is actually sand that came in during a tsunami. And more and more and more examples where we see we were able to find some of the destruction layers from the tsunami. So this was all very interesting, except, you know, from an academic perspective and from an archaeological perspective, it was very exciting and really interesting to find these tsunami deposits. But the worry was, hold on a second. We're talking about a place where people live on the coastline, and it's an area of the world in the Eastern Mediterranean. There are some of the most highly populated areas in the world. I mean, we're talking about an area that includes the Gaza Strip, includes Tel Aviv, Beirut, you know, all of these areas that have high concentrations of human populations. So this is a major risk factor. And the worry was, we certainly do not want this scene to ever look like this. So the good news is that we were able to, this information was brought to the government of Israel, and they assessed whether or not they thought that tsunamis should be included in the risk training and in the disaster emergency preparation plans for the country. And they did choose to include it. And so this is the same beach you saw from the beach with everyone running around having fun on the beach. Today, we have signs all the way up and down the coastline of Israel, highly concentrated in the areas of the big populations, like here in Tel Aviv and Jaffa, and also slowly adding them into the areas in between. And they also do emergency drills and educational programs for schools that are located in the tsunami zones, as well as just general information for the whole population. And the hope is that when a tsunami hits the next time, people will have the awareness that they won't stand and wait, and that they will respond to the warnings and the instructions. And so the loss of life, we hope, will be much, much, much lower than it could be. So I'd be happy to, I'd love to hear your thoughts and answer any questions that you have. Let me just get out here of the, okay.
Are you still hanging out with this jellyfish, or you guys are not in contact anymore?
You know, they say that many jellyfish live a very long time. So yeah. I every once in a while we reconnect.
But this is the first one I see that has subtitles and can say thank you.
Ah.
So thanks a lot, Beverly. We did have a few questions. When the kids need to go to a break because they're going to have LinkedIn training. One of the questions I saw from Sanyan is that if wind can cause tsunamis, and I guess the answer is depends on the wind, but you're the expert, right? And
yeah,
then, Mark would like to ask a question as well.
Sure. To answer the wind question, by definition, tsunamis are not wind caused, because the wind is typically affecting the upper surface of the water and not all the way through the water column. That's why tsunamis can go so far inland. There's one overlap, which is something that they sometimes call a meta tsunami, and some people accept them as tsunamis, some don't. And that's when you get a big storm surge. So if you've heard about during Hurricane Sandy, there was a very large storm surge that did succeed at overflowing into the land very far. And so it appears very similar to a tsunami, but it is caused by a surge from a pressure system. So it is quite a bit, they are separate, they are different.
Okay, so I'll let Mark ask a question. In fact, I saw the consequences of Hurricane Sandy in Fire Island, just north of New York, and it was very sandy indeed, so it was an excellent name.
Yeah.
So Mark, you had a question, raise a hand.
Yes. Was this tsunami in 2004 the one on Boxing Day?
Yes.
That also
exactly.
hit. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's also referred to as the Boxing Day Tsunami.
Because there's a big book about that by Michael Morpurgo. He wrote of a girl saving her life with an elephant on that day.
Oh wow! There's
Indonesia.
There are really some incredible stories of survival from that event as well. Very famous story of actually a British girl who was studying, her family were expats in Japan, and so she had just learned about signs of tsunami and managed to tell other people in the hotel, and they say she may have saved hundreds of lives just by alerting them and saying let's go up. I personally know a couple who were there, and the day before they had gone to meet some friends closer to the beach, and they'd found a shortcut to get to the hotel faster. And just because they knew of this shortcut, they probably survived, because when the surge came in, they immediately went back up the shortcut that they hadn't known about before, which otherwise they would have been really trapped. So it's important to know these routes and signs and pathways.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Rashid wants to ask a question. I don't know if you can see it.
sorry. Let me.
So about your career, how often will you need to be heading it to the sea and underwater, heading out
Heading out.
to the sea?
Yeah, yeah. So it really varies, but I do get to go out into the field quite often. And to be honest, I love my work so much that I live very close to my research site, so that it's very convenient. You know, some researchers live far away and can only go once or twice a year. I actually live in the same town, Caesarea, where we found all the, so I have very personal, I have a very personal investment to know about the safety here. And so I do get to go out. It depends, but let's just say usually, except for during Corona, where we were not allowed to go out, but normally I'm out in the sea at least once a month.
Nice. And the weather is usually perfect for that. I don't think it's ever too cold for you to go underwater.
It's always perfect for me. It's more a matter if it's too stormy.
Yeah, you see the previous speaker, Gary Scheinberg, he has an owl breeding facility, and you have your own archaeological site at home. So we all have our superpowers and special circumstances. It's great you can combine your passion with your work. And I visited Beverly at her university in Haifa a couple of months ago, and it's a great place. Her university building is not great because very it was actually designed by a Brazilian architect called Nehemiah, and I'm guessing it was his first building because it looks great from a distance, but it's not great to work there. But otherwise, Haifa is a fantastic place. And
Yeah. Well, it helps that we can see the sea from there, so at least the view is wonderful.
Oh, and you have Mount Carmel, which is fantastic as well, right? You have this big mountain just behind the city, and you can go there taking a little train. So Haifa is a great little city, I guess you could describe it as such, but it's very high quality of living there. Any additional questions before Sanyan takes over again? Or maybe Sanyan, you want to ask another question?
I have a question about the tsunami signs. So you were mentioning about how there's signs about like how to identify if there's going to be a tsunami. Are you talking about signs just before it, or like a few days prior to tsunami?
Oh, well, okay. So most tsunamis you don't get a few days. You know, you only have if you're fortunate, you have hours, of signs that we're aware of today anyway, because it's just like knowing when an earthquake will happen. It's difficult to have those, maybe volcanoes, you might have a little extra warning, but in fact on this coastline, some of the tsunamis that we expect to happen, we might not have more than 15 minutes or even 10 minutes warning, because the source of the tsunami is so close to the shoreline that we won't have a lot of time to react. And that's why it's especially important, because that 40 seconds, that a minute and a half that someone might get a head start is going to make a big difference, to what the outcome is. So that's why we're especially, I think in our best case scenario, we might have 90 minutes if we have a earthquake that happens, say a big event that happens in Greece or in a distance in the Mediterranean. But a lot of our events are unfortunately not going to give us a lot of warning time.
Right. And do you think that with the advancing technology, do you think we'll be able to start detecting if tsunamis are about to occur and have like a longer warning time?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's getting better and better. And I think one of the most important things, and one of the good and bad things about disasters is, the environment and the planet doesn't care about borders. They don't care what country it is, right? So, it's important that we have relationships with our neighboring countries, because part of our warning system is that they tell us what's happening there. So let's say if, we can know by what's happening after an earthquake, what happens to Greece, what happens to Turkey, what happens in Lebanon. And so, it's one of the ways, talk about an optimistic look at it, but one of the good things about environment and about, planetary issues like this is that it's regardless of borders. And so there's many times more communication through the science and through, you know, these disaster issues that help to build bridges.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, not trying to drag it, but I just have a really, I'm quite curious about this. So I take physics in my school, and I understand when it comes to shallower shore, the wave will become taller and thinner, right? So this is just a theory that I'm not so sure, but what if we dig up the beaches to be of same, yeah, so like there won't be any elevation of waves. Is that possible?
Wow. You'll need to send me a drawing and we'll think about it. You know, one of the things about beaches is that what you learn is that coastal engineering is probably the most specific, you know, everything that you do on a beach, it always wants to return to a steady state, but it's like it never can. So every time you engineer something on a coastline, nature's trying to bring it back to some kind of stasis. It's like a dog chasing its tail all the time. So even if you might succeed at changing the geometry to help alleviate the issue, the maintenance of it sometimes can be so complicated that it's, you know, even more effort. But one thing that we're finding, more and more research is showing, just don't build on the coast. If we could just back off and not try so hard to live directly on the coastline, the natural barriers that develop on coastlines are very effective in lowering the impact. But the problem is throughout the world, we are, you know, we're growing things, we have mariculture, we're taking over all of these natural buffers, and then we're upset when damage happens. Well, if we weren't there, you know, if we had more respect for allowing those natural buffers to establish themselves, and to, you know, the dune systems and, you know, the estuaries, you know, all of the mangroves, you know, these are wonderful systems for slowing down the impact of tsunamis. But the problem is that we're removing so many of them, you know, and we're changing them. So if I had my way, I would just say, let's back off. Let's give them some breathing, give the coast some breathing space, and we'll save money and save our lives.
Thank you.
Great. So thanks a lot, Beverly. So I have to jump into a LinkedIn training session now. So Sanyan is going to be teaching the other teenagers how he created his own LinkedIn account. So when they went to Davos for the past Wisdom Accelerator event, and you're most welcome to stay with us if you like to participate. There are 2 more sessions, but yeah, I'm guessing that you have a busy day, because it's a working day for you right now.
It is, yeah. Sundays are Mondays.
You're basically the only
Sunday, Monday.
with a different weekend. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for participating.